Our mini lecture today is on Module 15, Operant Conditioning. And in this picture here, we see our author holding up the box with a bird in it. This is known as Skinner's box, and we are going to look a little bit more at Skinner's box later on in our mini lecture. So what is operant conditioning? Operant conditioning is a type of learning which a behavior depends on the consequence that follows that behavior. Now we need to know one thing. Consequences are not always something bad. They can be something good too. But it's a type of learning which a frequency of behavior depends on the consequence that follows the behavior. So a frequency may increase if a consequence is reinforcing, if a consequence is good, if it's pleasurable. Or it may decrease if it's not reinforcing, if it might be something we associate as bad and all. So we'll look more at that throughout our mini lecture. So it's kind of like this situation. We have a mother, we have a daughter, we have a grocery store. Now, how many of you are guilty when you were a child of screaming and throwing a temper tantrum if you went to the grocery store with your parent and you wanted something, they wouldn't give it to you, and you pitched a fit? Many of us are probably guilty of that. So we've got here the mom's behavior giving candy to the daughter. The daughter will have a screaming temper tantrum. Okay. So what's the consequence? The consequence for the mom is the temper tantrum ends. The daughter, she receives a candy bar. Now, as we can see with the daughter, yes, that may be, oh, well, that's good for her. Okay, for the mom, yes, she's excited that she doesn't have the child screaming anymore. And I love in that first picture how we have the cashier with his hand over his ears going, oh my goodness. Okay, the result, the mom has to buy more candy, meaning that she's got to take money out of her pocket to pay for her child to get her child to be quiet. Basically, she's bribing her child. While the child's going, if I pitch a fit, I will be able to get candy bars and I can get what I want to and I will get my way. Yes, this is a reason how operant conditioning works. If you've ever gotten a spanking, that's operant conditioning. Most of the time, your parent or whoever gave you the spanking does not want you to do that behavior again. So who comes up with this? We have Edward Thorndike. He's a principal investigator behind operant conditioning. And he's the author of the law of effect that basically says that you have favorable consequences will occur more frequently, or behaviors occur more frequently with favorable consequences versus unfavorable consequences. So B.F. Skinner is a main principal psychologist behind the operant conditioning. And he basically comes up with new techniques and applies them to the world. And this is one thing with his Skinner's box. This is the Skinner's box, and yes, there is a bird in here. What happened in the box? There were mechanisms, and the bird had to learn which mechanisms to use because some of these mechanisms would not harm the bird in any way, but some of them would give it food and some of them would not. The bird would learn. Basically, with operant conditioning, you're training. You want someone or something to do a certain thing. So, with operant conditioning, you have two main things. You have reinforcement and you have punishment. Reinforcement is what's going to increase a likelihood of behavior. Okay? Punishment is a consequence that decreases the future likelihood of behavior. And one thing I like to think about to reinforce it, I'm not sure how many of you have seen commercials recently for Kraft macaroni and cheese. When this was made in 2020, this was a huge thing. Where you have a commercial where a child does not want to eat, and it's like, I'm not eating, I'm not going to do it, and then they bust open the Kraft macaroni and cheese, and the child eats and is happy. Okay, one, you're selling more macaroni and cheese by Kraft. Two, you're getting that child to eat because they're eating something they like. I'm kind of the same way. I'm a very picky eater, but I will eat what I like. Okay, and that's one thing too. I'm not really a fan of Kraft macaroni and cheese, if you were wondering about it. I'm an old Southerner, and I like the macaroni with the cheese and the butter put on it when you mix egg with milk and you pour that in there too and bake it. That's what I like. I like the old Southern recipe for that. But anyway, reinforcement is a consequence that increases future likelihood of behavior, while punishment is a consequence that decreases the future likelihood of behavior. Again, as I said, a spanking, or let's say you put your hand on the stove top. Okay, those are things that deal with operant conditioning, trying to get a reinforcement or punish, trying to increase the behavior or decrease the behavior. So some positive things would be when you increase the likelihood of behavior, following it with a desirable event or state. Um, for a child, if you want them to eat, say you have to eat all your food before you can get dessert, a child will do that before they can get dessert. In this cartoon here, I don't really understand it. I was not one to want to sleep in the same bed as my parents. But this child likes it. They say, this is great. I'll have to wake up crying in the middle of the night more often to be able to do that. But positive reinforcement will strengthen a certain behavior. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, will increase the likelihood of behavior by following with the removal of an undesirable event. So in this kind of case here, if you have a child who may go and take a potted plant and dump it on the ground, if you tell them no, they might. For example, when I was growing up, you would see a kid do that again, but if they got spanking, they did not want that. So you will remove that thing. You will not have a child dump out a potted plant anymore or throw a dish onto the ground. Primary reinforcement is what we do naturally, though. Okay, this is not necessarily negative and positive. This is things like with food and water, survival skills. If we are thirsty, we drink water. That replenishes our body. If we're hungry, we eat food. This keeps our body going. We have to have primary reinforcement to be able to live. For a dog, food is a primary reinforcement for a dog. If you want them to do treats, you reinforce it with food. I'll never forget going over to friends' houses and stuff and telling the dog to sit, and the dog doesn't, and it sticks its mouth open. I'm like, I'm not feeding you. But I loved how people would do that, though. They would give treats to their animals whenever, to be able to get that animal to do what they want it to do. And that's how you train a dog. You have to have lots of food. Punishment, though, is an undesirable event. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, these are things that they may naturally happen, and they teach you not to do it. When I was a child, yes, I'm guilty of touching the stovetop. I did it over at my grandmother's house, and I started crying and said, I want my mama. And my grandmother said, she's at work with your daddy, you can't have her. I will never forget that. My parents owned a vending business, and Mom would go work the routes during the summertime with Dad on a Monday, and I would stay with my grandparents. And I'll never forget, I touched the top of this hot stove, and getting an aloe plant was cut, and it rubbed over the aloe to be able to take the burn away, but I did not like it. I learned never to touch the top of the stove again. Or you have, in this other one, a child loses TV privileges for pulling the sister's hair. Most of the time, that child's going to want to watch TV, so they're not going to pull the sister's hair again. There are certain things, though, that we have deal. There are positive and negative consequences with operant conditioning and how you're going to reinforce these behaviors. So negative, you're going to prevent the undesirable approach from happening again. But some people decide that you can have fear and anxiety and lower self-esteem, and children who are punished may learn to use aggressions as a way to solve problems. Well, sorry. Okay, but negative, when you have that, it stops the undesirable behavior. While positive, on the other hand, you can actually control certain behaviors. It's effective. Children learn not to do it again, or if dangerous. And if you got a child trying to poke another child's eye out, this is going to be you're going to want to use negative, and they're not going to do it again. Okay, you're going to teach them not to do a dangerous behavior. This is a positive effect of that punishment. Okay, again, not all punishments are bad. Okay, and then you've still got where in this type of situation you are going to have a better outcome. Shaping is reinforcing behaviors is similar to a desired one. Okay, establishing new behaviors, how to be able to do certain things, getting people to do. When I was a child in 4th grade, I'll never forget, I helped one of my classmates. And the assistant who was in the room would always give me something. Miss O'Brien came in our room, and she would actually help Miss Shear, who was my teacher, and she would give us certain things, like if we help other people or whatever, it might be something. Well, one day I was helping this student, and she was like, very good, and I looked at her, I made a mistake. I said, what am I going to get today? Well, she's like, oh, I'll give your mom a call home and tell her how happy I am. Well, she did. I was happy about that. My mama chewed me out. She said, don't you ever ask for things. You do them just to be able to do them. She said, because you never know when people are going to need help in the end. Mom was shaping my behavior to be able to not want rewards for things that I did. Discrimination is to be able to distinguish between similar signals or stimuli to produce different responses. You need to understand, too, that there are different, what may be a punishment for one thing might not be a punishment for another thing. You have to respond to different stimuli to be able to get it. That's discrimination. Not necessarily, we're not talking about racial discrimination. We're talking about discriminating between two different things in our minds with behavior. Extinction is when we lose a behavior because no consequence follows that behavior. You will do, and this is basically, you think about this with memorization. When I was in school, we had to learn or memorize the Gettysburg Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so dedicated and so conceived may long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. And that's all I remember of the Gettysburg Address. I had to memorize the entire thing. It's about another paragraph or so. But anyway, this is what extinction is. I don't go around every day reciting the Gettysburg Address, so it's going to be lost as a behavior. Continuous reinforcement is when you reward follows every correct response. When you take a test and you put the correct answer, guess what? You're going to get rewarded by having points. But that's what continuous reinforcement is when you have a behavior. For example, a dog, to get it to learn a behavior, you have reinforced it with food. Partial reinforcement is when you have a scheduled reinforcement for a reward. You have certain things that are follow correct response and certain things that do not follow a correct response. Okay, these are things which go on, and it might happen sometimes. It might not always. It might happen other times. Overjustification is when you give a reward for doing what somebody already likes to do. For example, with me, there are certain things I like, but guess what? I don't necessarily need a reward for every single time that I do that. I don't necessarily like to be rewarded for every single little thing. A reward may lessen and replace the original motivation for actually doing something. That's overjustification, being rewarded for something that you already like to do. And why do we have this type of conditioning? Very simple. Biological predisposition. Basically, research suggests that we are designed to learn certain behaviors, that we do certain things, that we push forward. That's what we do. That's how we as humans act. And this is operant conditioning, your mini lecture today on operant conditioning.